Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining my organization development tip. This is for the University of Georgia Learning Leadership and Organization Development Master Program 8300E Spring 2025 for Organization Development class, proctored by Dr. Ali Cox. I am Stephen Fuller. I am a Readiness and Enablement Manager at Salesforce, which is a CRM software company dedicated to improving customer experience. Today, we're going to talk about fishbowls. So, have you ever owned a fishbowl growing up? And the type that I'm talking about today are those globular glass ones that can barely hold like two or three goldfish at a time. I'm sure the image resonates with you, whether you've owned one or not, right? We can learn a lot about fish bowls. If you're on the inside, you're probably, well, a fish. You don't have much choice in how the decor looks or who your neighbors might be. Maybe those other fish are hostile towards you. Maybe they're working alongside you to keep the house clean, or maybe you're in competition to grab the bits and pieces of flakes that get dropped mysteriously by the odd-shaped figures on the outside. And if you're like me on the outside, you watch an entire ecosystem flourishing as they figure out the best way to cohabitate with unwritten, tacit rules that keep harmony. From the outside perspective, you see things differently and slightly out of shape due to the curvature of the bowl. And I hope by now you're starting to see that I'm not really talking about bottom feeders and betas, but discussing how differing perspectives lead to different outcomes depending on whether or not you're on the inside or outside. In this organizational development tip, I'm going to introduce a method of facilitating conversations when multiple people share opposing viewpoints, opinions, values, and stakeholder views. These are called fishbowl windows or fishbowl discussions in project management. First off, before we even talk about how to set up a fishbowl discussion or how to facilitate, or even who goes into it, let's talk a little bit about what we're aiming to achieve when we do this. We set up fishbowl conversations basically to allow inclusive decision making. Many times in an organization, it's very difficult for people to find the ability to speak their mind or share an opinion that they might have due to constraining efforts around time, budget, psychological safety, fear of reprimandation, things like that. We want to make sure that we have members of different stakeholder groups sharing their own specific needs. So we're going to identify people that have diverse thoughts, that have diverse needs, and probably come from different areas of the organization to ensure that we're getting as many voices in the room as humanly possible. And they should all be serving towards the same goal, same project or outcome that's desired. And what we're aiming to really do is to build collaboration in a safe space where everyone's values and opinions are heard, listened to, summarized, and agreed upon for a course of action to move forward. When we look to set up a fishbowl discussion, we're going to have three main participant roles. You, as the OD practitioner or change management lead or project manager, will take the role of the moderator at the table. Your role is basically to keep conversations going and referee any kind of conflict that might come up, as well as making sure that we're adhering to the goals and group outlines that we set forth. You're acting kind of as a coach and as a person that is going to set the tone and ask the questions for our fish and our outsiders to observe and answer. Our fish, or what we consider the folks that are inside the fishbowl, these are stakeholders. And for the first round, it's generally recommended not to include people managers, just to make sure that we're not inputting a special biasness into the situation that would look for confirmation from the participants to support what they think management would want, right? And their role is basically to provide viewpoints and talk through change. These are the people that are going to be inside the fishbowl. These are the ones that are experiencing the change, and they're going to be offering their opinion through conversations. Lastly, we have outsiders, and these are the remaining stakeholders. Key decision makers should be considered outsiders for the first round, again, just not to influence the route of conversation or the way that we want it to go. And their role as outsiders is to observe, take notes, listen, actively listen until they're either ready to sit in or they are tapping in. And we see as we go through the fishbowl conversation that the fish and the outsiders will have opportunities to rotate their roles so that everyone in the group should have a capability to actually bring a conversation to the table, as well as observe the conversation and form their own thoughts and opinions outside of the fishbowl. To set up your fishbowl, you're going to want a literal round table. And generally speaking, when you think about the number of people, ideal size of the group is probably between 6 and 8, but you divide the number of people by two and add two to figure out how many chairs there are that you need to include. Basically, the idea is that you always want two empty chairs to be available, and they won't actually be seated with any of the participants. And we'll discuss why that is in just a moment. As the change practitioner or organizational development practitioner, you're going to take the role of the moderator and you're going to set the tone for your fishbowl discussion. So you'll sit in front of the group and define the purpose and the talk of the topic. You'll greet the participants, explain why everyone's gathered, and introduce the big question, right? The issue that we're trying to solve for. And this could be preferably something small, something easy to start the conversation going. And what it's meant to do is to build confidence amongst the group and allow people to start offering their thoughts and opinions. We want to make sure we're setting up our table for success. So make sure we have ample room, logistically speaking, for people to stand around the table and room to sit. We want to ensure that there are two chairs empty and initially invite our first school of fish, sorry for the pun, to sit down. Then we're going to explain ground rules and promote respect, active listening. You're setting the stage for really setting a tone of psychological safety for your group, as well as encouraging people to take turns speaking and actively listening to each other as we're going through our conversations. Next up, we're going to begin the conversation. We'll pose our thought-provoking question and then facilitate the flow. Generally speaking, you're going to want to time box this, and this could be anything from 5, 10, 15 minutes. It really depends on how big the group size is and how, I guess you could say, participating the participants are. We're going to want to then make sure that we're doing our job of facilitation. So if anything goes off track, you might have to steer the school back to the original questions. Make sure you're paying attention to any quiet participants as well as quiet dissenters, people that are not willing to talk because they don't agree with the change that's happening. We want to encourage people to talk about the real life implications of the proposed process change or organizational change in order to get the understanding of experiences between the participants of the fish. And lastly, please make sure you're keeping to the time box. After that, the time is up. You'll go ahead and summarize the key talking points of the group. Make sure that you are unbiased throughout. Thank everyone for their candid feedback and prepare for what we're going to do for rotation. Next up, we will rotate the bowl and iterate. So from here, we're going to ask the outsiders who have been standing outside of the fishbowl, to go ahead and either take a seat at one of the empty chairs or politely tap a person on the shoulder to replace them. So the idea here is that if you're an outsider, you should have the ability to either interface with a former fish, right, that had brought up a conversational point in which you can share your thoughts and opinions with them and allow them to respond. Or if the fishbowl is getting too full, then you can tap someone in, tap someone out, and then take their place to continue the conversation. We're going to keep doing this over and over from step one until you get some general themes and a lot of the pain points might have been talked through, and we have some cohesive group cohesion where a conclusion can possibly be reached off of the discussion that we've made. Make sure you're setting the expectations for your participants. Remember, the fish are the people responsible for having the conversations inside the bowl. Ideally, we want to make sure that they're speaking one at a time, that they do not interject while other fish are talking, and that they're actively listening and preparing to respond when it's their turn to speak. Again, we're setting the foreground to ensure that we're allowing an open experience for everyone without making it difficult for anyone to share their thoughts or opinions. And likewise, the outsiders are the people that are responsible for observing the discussion from the outside. They're expected not to speak at all. Rather, they're actively listening to the discussion, taking notes to help formulate the thoughts and opinions that they'll share with the group when they tap in. Optionally, you can always allow them to have a whiteboard space to summarize any discussion points or thoughts that are happening inside the bowl, so that when other members of the fish step on the outside, they can see some of the thought processes and some of the key points that the outsiders thought were important. A few suggestions for success in areas that I've actually participated in a fishbowl discussion, both as a moderator and a participant. First off, start with an easier question. We're not going to change the entire organization or ask a really deep question that's going to be super impactful because people are more likely to be afraid to answer. We want to tackle something simple. For example, how can we improve the team culture in our remote hybrid setting, right? we'll start with that and then try to answer for a larger question is how can we improve the culture of our organization in general, right? We want to make sure that we're enforcing our rules and time allotments to make sure that everything is fair and that people have the ability to take equity in the discussion. If you allow people to go over their allotted time, then you run the risk of actually creating an imbalance of power in the power dynamics within the group. And of course, the whole purpose of the fishbowl conversation is to level set without worrying about titles, positions, roles, stakeholder perspectives, so on and so forth. Always make sure that you're giving thoughtful praise for diverse feedback. It is very, very scary in a group setting to come up with a dissenting opinion. So when that occasion does arise, you want to make sure that you're applauding them, that you're giving them the recognition for their bravery in applying a theory or a thought or conversation that isn't necessarily going with the flow of the group. And lastly, always make sure to gather takeaways and feedback from the group during a debriefing session. When everything is over, right, we're going to want to make sure that we de-escalate any sort of the heat in the room. We're going to want to make sure that people have had chance to understand what the feedback is. And before we make a decision, to make sure and just gut check, is everyone feeling okay? Are we ready to move forward? Or do we need to include more stakeholders or have additional discussions before we can make a decision? And as George Bernard Shaw said, and he's a Nobel Prize winning playwright, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, right? So with that said, I just want to say a very big thank you for everyone who has listened to my organization development tip. And I'm including a one-page reference guide for the fishbowl discussion in how you can go ahead and set up your table and iterate until you finished your discussion to a success. Thank you and have a great day.